One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. Today we've got a fantastic episode for you. We've got an interview with Brandon Meyers, the Chief Revenue Officer of Adara. And Brandon is somebody that worked his way up from the very bottom to the very top and has even managed to help pivot the company from a more programmatic transactional revenue model to a subscription model over the course of not just the last 3 months during COVID, but over the course of the last few years. And it's been an incredible journey for him. And he walks us through it in a way that I think is pretty interesting and compelling. So it's a great show. Now, before that, of course, we've got to thank our sponsors. We've got two sponsors on the show. We've got a new sponsor for you. So the first sponsor is Sapper Consulting. Sales enablement is easy. All you have to do is create perfectly targeted content, stay informed on email best practices, drive more engagement quarter over quarter, spend less money, and do all of this with less time. Okay, it's not that easy, but Sapper Consulting has built Reggie to keep the promise of sales enablement and help carry the load, to help keep your team doing what they do best, winning. Reggie uses artificial intelligence to create entire outbound, inbound, and even follow-up sales campaigns faster. Using over 1 billion rows of performance data across 75 industries, Reggie uses your targeting to inform your campaigns, decrease the time you spend creating campaigns, and because the campaigns are structured on email best practices, your campaign warm-up period will shrink. The result, more sales meetings. Start creating better sequences faster. Go to go.regie with 1G. go.regie.io. go.regie.io. Thank you, Sapper Consulting. Our second sponsor is Outreach, the #1 sales engagement platform. Outreach revolutionizes customer engagement by moving away from siloed conversations to a streamlined and customer-centric journey. Leveraging the next generation of artificial intelligence, the platform allows sales reps to deliver consistent, relevant, and responsible communication, not irresponsible communication, not "I'm going to the restroom now," not irresponsible communication, but responsible communication for each prospect every time, enabling personalization at scale, previously unthinkable, unimaginable, impossible. Check them out at www.outreach.io. I'm sorry, I'm in a strange mood, but this is going to be a great episode. Give it a listen. Brandon Meyers, CRO of Adara. Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. Today, I've got Brandon Meyers on the show. We're really lucky to have him. He is the Chief Revenue Officer of a company called Adara. And Adara is a data cooperative focused on the travel and discretionary spending space. So we'll dig into that. Brandon has over 15 years of experience in technology sales and ad tech, and he's recognized as one of the leading figures in the Bay Area on advertising technology. Of course, he's also a fantastic Revenue Collective member. No coincidence that he's on the show. Brandon, welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast.
Sam, glad to be here. Thanks so much.
We're happy to have you. So the first place we start is your baseball card, which is basically trying to contextualize your expertise. So you are the Chief Revenue Officer of Adara. Now, I gave a one-liner on what Adara is, but in your words, tell us what is the company, tell us what is a data cooperative, walk us through, the basic business model.
Sure. Yeah, and there's kind of an evolution of our business, and maybe I can take you guys through that as well. But ultimately, who we are today and who we have been over the last several years is really a company that's been able to aggregate unique data sets across the travel industry. And now we're moving into adjacent marketplaces as well. Obviously, COVID has really caused some constraints in travel. And so with that requires us to kind of expand the addressable market that we're approaching. So what do we do, right? And, one, we've got first party relationships with a number of enterprises like Marriott, United, American Airlines. We've been able to aggregate data from these companies in real time and then use that to power business results for these types of companies. So some of the ways that we work with them are helping them to enhance their CRM, helping to really work on the fraud and identity side when we recognize a common ID, being able to understand if that's a transactor or not. And then just more tactically, things like audience targeting to drive conversion for these types of companies. And so I think that's a really easy way to sum up what we do and what we focus on as a business.
So do you sell to like the chief marketing officer? Is that
Mhm.
is that your primary persona?
Yeah, that's right. So it could be on that side. We work also with advertising agencies as well. And so it could be a buyer within an ad agency also.
And is it a subscription service? Is it recurring revenue, or is it
Mm.
delivered in a different way?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a really good conversation, and maybe let me take you through a little bit of the story of Adara, and that might get to a good answer for you
Would
to
love
that
to hear it.
question. Yeah, so effectively, Adara started probably about 15 years ago now, and really the idea is that we can use data to help drive predictive results for companies, and so as we kind of got our feet on the ground in that space and evolved and scaled that business, over time, what happened was the market started to shift. And so, in 2019, we saw, in ad tech in general, a lot of companies moving towards bringing capabilities in house. And so the way that we had to work with our customers had to change. And so what did that mean for us? That means we need new pricing models. We needed to figure out new delivery mechanisms for our data, so on and so forth. And so if you look at our business, let's say 24 months ago, the majority of our revenue came from, very transactional IO based business. Last year, what we did was we spun out some technology, which we call Cortex, which is effectively is a catalog of audiences and data that someone can subscribe to. So today, as it stands, we have both subscription revenue. We still have a tremendous amount of transaction revenue that we're kind of managing on both sides. And so we're in the middle of a bit of a market transition. At the same time, we're also transitioning our business. And so you see kind of a bifurcated model between both the transaction business and the new business, which is more of a traditional type of SaaS model. So that's kind of where we're at. And we're really aggressively focused on converting the majority of our existing customer base over to this new world.
Well, good luck. It's a difficult journey. My experience, and I don't know if you've experienced the same thing, but I've worked with and consulted for a bunch of different companies. It actually sounds like you have a legitimate, this catalog sounds like a legitimate subscription offering. One of the challenges that early stage companies sometimes make is they want to call transactional revenue subscription revenue, but the customer doesn't view it as a subscription. The customer views it as a transaction. And I've often found that the real way to understand if it's recurring, if it's a subscription, is to ask the customer, do they view it as such?
Hmm.
I don't know if you've encountered any of those challenges or difficulties.
Yeah, I'd say what's changed for us, and I think what's also creating an opportunity for us in the marketplace is a couple of anecdotes that we've gotten from C-level folks that work in ad tech. Our data is just really underutilized because the cost of data is exorbitant or extortionate in some cases. And so what we found is that if you can create the subscription-based kind of all-you-can-eat type of model for data, data is used in a much more profound way. And so, the idea is that data has to be used at scale in this space, and there's really no incentive for the buyer to kind of scale up if I'm looking at it from a transaction standpoint, right? I use this very specific bit of data for one very specific thing, and then it's easy for me to move on. And so we found ourselves in a place where we have a legitimate opportunity to leverage subscription because there's true benefits for the customer on the other side of that by getting access to all you can eat data for kind of one set fee. And so there's benefits to us to have a recurring revenue and predictable revenue, and then the benefit to the customers is they have a fixed cost for a really unique data asset in which they can go in and use in a very direct and deliberate way across their enterprise.
Well, it sounds like a powerful offering. So I'm excited for this transition and this journey that y'all are embarked on.
Hmm.
Now, speaking of journeys, let's talk a little bit about you. So, what's your background? Where are you from? How'd you get here? And how did you end up as the CRO of Adara? I think we'll be really interested because I know a little bit of your life story, and I'm fascinated and inspired by it. But tell the rest of the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Midwest town, kind of a middle class family situation or single parent household situation, and so not unique for the Midwest, as it were. And so it was really hard to kind of sit in that community in that space and try to envision myself in the C-suite or in an executive position, somewhere beyond kind of what I knew. And so it was really critical for me to kind of escape or get beyond that. And so it was actually quite funny. I mean, literally the day that I got my bachelor's degree, I went home, packed up my car, and left. And my mom came outside and she's like, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to Florida, Mom." And so, yeah, just kind of looking at Michigan and the economy in Michigan at that time, there really wasn't, much to strive for. There's the furniture industry in Michigan, and then the auto industry in Michigan. And in 2005, we're very close to the place where the auto industry was, required to receive a federal bailout. And so all of those things just, left me almost, feeling in a certain way that there was a bit of hopelessness in terms of, future opportunity within my own community. And so I knew I had to leave. It didn't necessarily, have a destination in mind, but I had some friends in Orlando and decided to go down there and take a shot at an opportunity. And so I moved down there. I had an interview lined up, one of one interview, got the job, saw myself entering into the buy side. So it was on the marketing side, working for Southwest Airlines Vacations at the time. Spent a few years there, realized pretty quickly that I wanted to be on the sales side and selling advertisement. And so I moved back to the Midwest to Chicago, spent some time at Orbitz and a couple of other firms, and then eventually landed in San Francisco and joined Adara. And this was 2011. So I joined Adara as an individual contributor, spent about 2 years doing that. And then the company was looking to expand overseas. And so I quickly raised my hand and said, this is an awesome opportunity for me to get sales leadership experience, but also, get the expat experience, which at that time I looked at something that's incredibly valuable for me. So I found myself, in London, a one-of-one employee, introducing this new brand to advertising agencies in Europe. And that was a really big challenge. I mean, no one knew who I was. No one knew who this company was. And, we're selling data in a market where, talking about data, obviously, I think a lot of people are familiar with GDPR and some of the things that have come as a result of that is almost taboo to a certain extent. And so that was really challenging, the first 6 months of just a lot of swing and misses. But eventually we got our feet on the ground. And over the course of about 2.5 years, we launched offices in Dublin and Paris, Germany and Dubai, and scaled that business across EMEA from like 0 to about 22 million in that 2.5 year time frame.
Wow.
So it was a tremendous run and really, really rewarding experience. And at that time, our business was growing. And in 2015, we closed our Series C funding of about 23 million. And in that year from 2015 to 2016, our business is really running very fast in EMEA, but globally we started to see some headwinds, and we actually burnt through that Series C funding quite quickly. And so that left our company in a situation where we were trying to figure out how do we grow when we burned through a tremendous amount of cash on things like marketing and scaling up the team, but the revenue wasn't growing as quick as the spend, and so that was quite challenging for us. So I spent some time talking to our CEO, our CTO, and some of the board members about ways that we can go to market in a different way that might allow us to kind of break that next kind of barrier to growth. So created a plan, created a much more flat organization, started to focus more on the fundamentals versus the splash and pizzazz that kind of got us to where we were, and was able to step into the CRO role, managing a global team at that time. So 2016, we kind of finished a reorg. 2017, we hit the ground running, saw really tremendous growth in 2017. And so we saw about a 35% growth that year. And then from 2018 to 2019, another 45% growth and broke the $100 million top line sales figure. And so it was a really awesome run. And then kind of to the earlier part of our conversation, that's when we started to see the market change in 2019. And really forced our hand to say we're moving to this more kind of SaaS-based model, and how do we start to convert our customers to what the future is for our business. And so that's kind of where we sit. And then 2020 comes around, our beachhead in travel, and this has just been a hugely disruptive event for our business and also the industry at large. And so, yet again, we kind of see ourselves in a situation where, we have to pivot and expand pretty aggressively to make sure that, we don't lose steam and we can kind of continue our trajectory in this space. And so that's, what resulted in the broadening of our go-to-market to this discretionary spending versus just travel, as it were.
Wow. Well, a lot to unpack there. I have some questions. And the first one, I mean, I'm always just interested, particularly, Midwestern kid from Grand Rapids, Michigan, finds himself in London, team of one. What are your observations or conclusions? What surprised you about trying to build a business in Europe? And what lessons do you think we can take from that and apply them to the United States? What was it like doing that? And what's your observations about business culture in Europe and the pros and the cons?
Yeah, no, great questions. So, a couple of observations. One, what I did experience is that selling is very different in London and then, certainly the broader market of EMEA as a whole. Coming from the United States, you have this perception as a foreigner, selling to these markets that, hey, these guys are kind of coming in and they know everything. And it really required me to understand and get ahead of or anticipate the perceptions or stereotypes that may have come with being an American in this foreign world. And how do I take a step back and start with listening versus here, let me tell you how to, run programmatic advertisement using data, which is the solution that we're going to market with. And so there's a lot more upfront investment in relationships and understanding the buyer in Europe that just a lot of times in the US, we kind of fast forward past and that kind of happens along the way versus creating that upfront connection. And so that was one of the biggest things that I saw is that desire and demand to actually know the person before you get into in-depth business conversations. That it really was a pretty direct cadence that happened time and time again. The second thing that I learned quite quickly is that Europe is a hugely fragmented market as compared to the United States. And so it was really hard to build programs that would scale because oftentimes you have someone that sits in London that are making decisions for the UK. You have someone that sits in Paris that are making decisions for the French market, so on and so forth. It's really hard for us to kind of sit in the US and only work in the US, those of us that have, and understand how lucky we are to have one big consolidated market to go sell into. It's really easy to create scalable opportunities in the US environment. And then when you get overseas, it becomes a much more fragmented conversation. And you have to almost build individual businesses, at least in the category and space that we're in order to be successful across the entire region. And so that was a much different approach to building up a business than what I experienced in the past. And certainly had its own headwinds.
And yet you mentioned 22 million in 2 years. That's success. That's great success. What do you attribute that to? Besides your genius.
well, I think a couple of things. One, it's just being relentless. As I mentioned, the first 6 months, there was a lot of swing and misses. And we just, really aggressively, worked to make sure that we had an opportunity to start to convert some of the customers in our pipeline over to trials and then happy long-term customers. I think the next thing that was really critical was you cannot discount the kind of need to actually hire locally as well. And so it was really important for us to find a French person in Paris that knew our business that could represent us there, because there were just some rooms that I would never be able to get a seat at the table in because I don't speak the language or I don't fully understand the culture end to end. And so it would not only be arrogant but just kind of a miss for me to believe that I could kind of follow a script or a cadence of hiring people that kind of reflect what I've seen in the past. It really had to be a much more broader view of hiring locally and making sure that the folks that are representing our business in those markets really truly understand the culture, can speak the language, and those sorts of things. And so I think that was it was tough. It's tough to get people to come and take a shot at an American startup where they don't know who that brand is, but just by luck or tenacity from a recruitment standpoint, we're able to get the right people in the right seats to be able to move the needle forward for our business.
Yeah, well, great job. I want to shift to just your journey upwards, not just your journey across oceans. But you started at Adara as an individual contributor, and now you're the chief revenue officer. And that journey is a journey that many, many people, I think, want to emulate. When you think about the reasons why, and not just the reason, how you made it, but it's pretty clear, you've been doing it. You've outlasted the average tenure. Average tenure at a kind of venture-backed company for a CRO is about 17 months, and you've been there, I think, 4 years, if my math is right. So what do you attribute your success to? You clearly, and what's different at the CRO level that, it's as a set of skills that you've had to really develop versus, as a sales manager, maybe even as a VP of sales? When you think about, because there's people listening that are early in their career and they say, I've got to get started working on these skills. What skills do you think have been critical to your success as a CRO?
Yeah, I think one thing that was really important for me, and something that I've heard, from my colleagues and peers in the C-suite now, is that from day one, I was someone that showed up and had a sense of ownership over the portion of the business that I had control of. I wasn't there to simply do a job. I was there for the benefit of the company. And that attitude and that mindset really allowed me to be in a place where I was heard and seen in a way that was meaningful, because it was genuine and it was authentic. It wasn't a matter of me saying, here, what can I do to make my position in this company a little bit better, but how do I show up every day and make this company better? And how do I make the people around me better? And it was that mindset and that attitude that I think really kind of took me from A to Z in my trajectory in the business. And that attitude never changing. I think the other thing that was pretty important for me, and certainly something that I've heard pretty clearly from the rest of the C-suite as well, is that I have a hunger and a desire to continue to learn and evolve my craft. And that's pretty important, particularly when you kind of look at the way the world's evolving today, right? New markets are forming and disappearing at an incredibly rapid rate. And so you have to be able to understand, contextualize kind of what's happening today, but also anticipate what changes are going to be critical and relevant for tomorrow. And that's something that I've always really had a keen eye for, is to understand or anticipate how the market will evolve and what can we do to make sure that we're in a place to be able to weather those changes. And so I think those are some of the things that have kind of gotten me to a place where I've been able to grow and accelerate my career in the organization. And it really just kind of boils down to complacency. I think there are a lot of people kind of get complacent in a role or a situation that's comfortable. And even in a place where I've been comfortable, I've never been complacent. I've always wanted to push my team and the company to the next level. And that's, I think, the grit that's kind of driven me to get to the place where I'm at today.
Those are clearly incredibly important attributes. There's a specific skill that I'm just wondering how you developed or what you did to become proficient at, which is that the managing upwards is something sometimes that people struggle with, and specifically managing to the board and to the CEO. And a part of that is just storytelling around data, storytelling around objective financial information, and learning how to build a budget, learning how to build a forecast, and then, of course, sticking to that forecast and telling a story around the numbers, but understanding the numbers themselves. How did are you just innately mathematical or analytical? Was there training that you sought? Because that's where I feel like when I see VPs of sales kind of fall down, it's because they're just used to accepting, a plan from the CFO, and they haven't forced themselves to build the skills to build their own plan. What did you do to develop that proficiency and literacy?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of boldness that you have to have in order to be kind of successful in that arena. And that boldness has to kind of live and die with, I'm not just willing to accept a number at face value, right? I'm going to give you a plan that matches what the company's objectives are. And if you want to, invest in that plan, then great, let's go do it. But at the same time, there are certain things that you aren't able to do when you have constraints. And I think that's a challenge, is that some people aren't bold enough just to kind of put a hard line in the sand and say, this is what's possible, right? I've done my math, I've done the homework, and I know that this is what the team can accomplish next year. And you can always invest in growth. I mean, we kind of hear that time and time again in Silicon Valley, but sometimes companies just don't want to, release the funds in order to achieve that. And I think you have this dance of, can you deliver X, Y, Z with this? And if you can't, then maybe you're not qualified. And at a certain point, you have to be bold enough as a leader to say, I am qualified. I know what I'm talking about. Here's all of the data to support it. And kind of what do you want to do as a business? And I think that conversation is really critical. And it also requires a certain DNA of a person to say that I'm just not going to accept kind of blind expectations. You got to do the upfront math, create a story and a plan and a narrative to support all of those things, and get some alignment and agreement around what's feasible and what's possible from a business perspective. I think part of that's understanding the market that you're in, understanding your team's capability and capacity, and then making sure that you're telling the right story, whether that's to the CFO or to the board around what's possible. And then obviously having the right checkpoints along the way, right? Are we on track? Do I understand my pace of business? Am I on track to hit the goal? Do I have the right pipeline in order to deliver the end number and those sorts of things, and making sure that you do have that transparent conversation with all the necessary parties to make sure that if you are on track, people know it, but at the same time, if you're trending behind, people know it, and also, am I able to create a plan to say, here are the things that we need to invest in as a company to be able to get back on track. And so those are the types of conversations that I have, both with CFO, CEO, and then also with other interested parties within the company and the organization to say, hey, here's what's feasible, here's the backup and supporting information, and this is the investment case that we need in order to deliver what the company's goals are. And then that becomes a horse trading discussion, right?
Does that boldness, is that just part of your, as you said, part of your DNA that just comes from your background, your upbringing, or is it a skill that you honed?
Yeah, I think it may be more just kind of nature versus nurture in me. And that I've kind of come from a place where certainly not a lot of expectations were put in front of me. And I think that to be able to break free from that requires a bit of boldness. And so I think back to the initial story of, hey, I didn't see an opportunity in front of Michigan, so I packed in my car and decided to leave that next day. I think that boldness has always been with me to say, listen, this is not good enough, or this is what what it should be, and so let me go out and go figure out what that is and go get it. And certainly not taking no for an answer when it comes to what I believe is possible.
Cool. Well, mazel tov to you, sir. One of the things that you've said, and I think we were talking about like how to manage your career and how to think about startups the right way. You've mentioned be selective over what responsibilities you take on, and that's a trap that I've fallen into myself. And for me, it was forcefully arguing that I should run marketing when I didn't know enough at the time about marketing to be an effective, VP. When you say that, tell me what you're thinking about and how it's exemplified in your career.
Yeah, I think it's really about understanding your strengths and trying to mold your career in a way that emphasizes your strengths, as opposed to figuring out ways that you can develop your weaknesses better. And I think that's a really kind of nuanced discussion that you should have with yourself, right? What are the things that I'm really strong at, and can I get to the place that I want to get to in my career by emphasizing those strengths versus figuring out ways to make sure that I'm this well-rounded player that can kind of do all. And I think in the startup world, even more so than kind of larger enterprises, it's very easy to wear a lot of hats and to take on more and more responsibilities. Quite frankly, in most of the situations I've been in, if you raise your hand, you will get a task. And so I think it's really important to understand that more responsibilities doesn't actually mean more trajectory upwards in the company. Oftentimes it means you're taking on more risk in a way that you may not deliver. And so for me, that was one of the, I think, foundational principles for me in my career, is to figure out what am I really good at, and to try to do more of those things as opposed to looking at things that I'm not so great at and trying to be involved in those things in a way that may be a distraction to some that are really deeply experts in those spaces. And so that discipline, I think, has been pretty important for me, and certainly is something that I would recommend most people kind of looking at from a career standpoint, and how do they build themselves up into an executive.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Another thing you've mentioned in the past, and this sort of hits a little too close to home for me because I'm from the DC area, but you've sort of advised people not to play for the Wizards. So tell us what you mean by that, because if John Wall's healthy, I feel like maybe he and Bradley Beal are a powerful combination, but it's hard to say. He's never healthy, so we don't know.
Yeah, this was more of a Michael Jordan reference, and I think pretty timely with the ESPN special that's come out recently. But ultimately, Jordan, most people would probably agree, is the best basketball player of all time, right? If not one of the best, or however you want to phrase it. And that Wizards chapter was just unnecessary, right? I think he could have, gone on top, and certainly, did go out in a very special way. But that next chapter and just saying, hey, I need to get back on the court, or if you're, Brett Favre, I got to get back on the field, and maybe I'm pushing it too far. And I think it's really important for everyone to understand, hey, if you've gotten to a place where you've reached a certain amount of success, whether that's in that role or in that company, right? A lot of startups, falter here. I think, Groupon, great, kind of example of a company that, built an amazing kind of runway for themselves in a very short amount of time. They had a $20 billion opportunity to exit from Google, and walked away from it for the hopes that there was something bigger. But ultimately, I believe that success kind of comes in phases, and you have to understand where your crescendo is, and it's really important for you to recognize that, and kind of walk on to the next thing, as opposed to doubling back down and playing in a way that you're kind of playing against the clock. And so I certainly think that's a good anecdote, and a way to live life is that hey, there are opportunities in front of you, and take them to the top. But it's okay to walk away at the top, as opposed to, kind of climbing down or rolling down that next hill and trying to figure out a way to climb back up.
So how do you feel about Tom Brady playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Yeah, I don't know that that's going to end so well, man.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We're almost at the end of our time together, but the last thing I want to talk to you about is just COVID, because you mentioned how much it's impacted you and your business and your family. What do you think? I guess what's your takeaway? Like, how have you and how has your team responded? I mean, part of it is obviously you're going into brand new lines of business, so there are major strategic shifts. But what about on a day-to-day basis? How are you managing your team differently? What are you concerned about? What are you excited about? Give us your take on, the last 4 months of a terribly managed global pandemic in the United States.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in March, when you started to see some of the countries shut down as a result of COVID, our beachhead is in travel, and so we were on the front end of that. And so when the situation arose, when the China market got shut off from the United States, and then you started to see some of the other countries get shut down from a travel perspective, that impacted us in a pretty dramatic fashion, in a very quick fashion. And so as a company, we've gone through a huge downsizing. 55% of our staff has been let go as of March. And so that hit us pretty furiously. So a couple of things happened. One, as a leader in an organization, where you're starting to see that sort of, kind of downsizing happen, it's tough, right? A lot of one-on-one conversations with folks to let them know that they were impacted, how they're being impacted, what the company is or is not able to do, for them in their individual situations, and having those conversations very directly and very openly was important, but also was very taxing, right? Taxing on me as a leader, taxing emotionally, that sort of thing. But as a leader, you also have to figure out a way to take the good with the bad, and understand that, hey, I have to stand in front of this person and give them some bad news. But if I don't do that, it's going to be even worse. And so, those first few weeks, it was really a matter of being super transparent, super honest with the status of the business, the status of the world, and what does that mean for you? And then, after that, it was a matter of, how do I get people to understand that there's still value here? It's not time to jump off the ship. And how do we rally around, kind of the opportunity that may still be ahead of us? And so those were really, nuanced conversations. Some of those were team calls, in which, was just a simple, happy hour type of conversation. We had some really amazing discussions where we would have, representatives from the global team kind of talk about what specifically was happening in their community. And so, being on a call with our EMEA team, right, and hearing about what's going on in Dubai, in Spain, France, and the UK, and all of the different personal experiences, was really quite powerful for the team, but also really interesting, in terms of just humanity, and understanding and seeing the reflections of what's happening in those communities, and the similarities of the experiences that folks are going through around the world. And so I think just that general sharing of experiences really helped build camaraderie in a pretty, difficult time. And then after that, it's a matter of, how do you just get people to focus? And so, we certainly have a tremendous amount of one-on-one and group calls, even till today, to create some sort of connectivity in an environment where connectivity isn't necessarily encouraged. And so I think there's just some things about being a human being, right, that COVID is really challenged, right? Challenge some of the norms. And I think companies are kind of being forced in a place where they're having to address social issues in a way that they haven't had to in the past. And we've certainly seen that both from a COVID standpoint and then some of the other issues that are going on in the United States, more specifically at the moment.
Yeah. And is that the right place for corporate America to be? Do you feel like they're being pushed, and, you also mentioned how, the national government doesn't seem to be leading, or the federal government, I suppose, at least in the United States. And so companies themselves are developing all kinds of different policies in the absence of any firm guidance from the higher ups, I suppose. Is that the right place for corporate America, or is it just is it a feature or perhaps a bug of a leadership vacuum, do you think?
I think it's time, right? I mean, we're spending so much of our lives dedicated to our jobs, and even more so now in this remote work environment. It's really hard to separate the two, right? I think a lot of folks are feeling this, just kind of rolling clock at the moment, and it's really hard to distinguish when it's my time versus when it's work time. And so, at a certain point, I think it's fair to start to expect your company to care about your life more broadly, because you are being sucked into this world of kind of nonstop work. And again, that line is being blurred between personal and professional life in a way that I don't think anyone was quite prepared for. And so I think there's a number of factors that are leading to a place where I don't see how companies can ignore their role in people's lives at a certain point. So I do think it's the right time. And I also think there's a tremendous amount of really valuable leaders that we have in the business environment. And they haven't necessarily had an incentive in the past to address some of these issues, whether they're social or beyond. And so I think, right now where you're starting to see employees demand certain things in a way that they haven't in the past, the companies are forced to react because that line is blurred between the personal and professional world. So I do think it's time. I think it's appropriate, and I think it's necessary in order for us to, really see change, because our economy is really woven into the way that we live our lives. And so I don't necessarily think that there's a reason to separate the two at a certain point, just given how ingrained and intertwined those two things have become.
Makes a lot of sense. Brandon, before we go, we like to pay it forward a little bit and hear about some of the leaders or the books, the content. That word is so overused at this point, but the content that's influenced you. When you think about mentors, when you think about great CEOs or founders or great influences or great books you've read, what comes to mind if you want to help the audience learn a little bit more, go a little bit deeper, and also, be inspired by some of the people that have inspired you?
Yeah. So there's some personal things that I can share, and then also just some more broad things. So one thing that has been pretty critical for me was actually getting an executive coach early on and me taking on the role of a CRO. So there's a lady by the name of Jocelyn Kung who's really played an amazing role in just making me a more well-rounded leader, really helping me understand what leading with empathy means and having emotional intelligence. And I think those things are important. And not only I think you're starting to hear society demand empathy out of leaders in a way that wasn't really mandated or required in the past. And so I do think as anyone's kind of looking to take that next step in their career, and an investment in an executive coach, really is something that can be incredibly helpful. And this person specifically, Jocelyn did a fantastic job. And some of the lessons I've learned, working with her, both strategically, but then also just kind of helping some of the early critical conversations that I had to have with colleagues and other leaders, and helping me just kind of navigate and figure out how do I think about representing myself in those discussions was really, really helpful. And so I certainly something that I think is invaluable. And you don't necessarily have a mentor, figuring out if there's someone that you can engage in that capacity really is meaningful. And then in terms of just, books and things like that, I mean, there's, limitless literature around being in business. But something that I read recently that I found very valuable in the sense of just, understanding humanity more better is a book called Sapiens. And there's a lot of lessons in that book that kind of talk about, how humans have interacted over time, the role of commerce in all of our lives and those sorts of things. And so I found a lot of just kind of lessons out of that book to help me, better understand people, where we're at today as a society and how we got here. And having that broader context on the world really helps me in some of the bigger conversations that I've had, whether that's in person or, on a stage, to be able to contextualize the world and really, talk in a, informed way about society more broadly. That's been super helpful for me as well. So, to the extent that those things help, I'm happy to share them with you.
Absolutely. Well, Sapiens, great book, and Jocelyn Kung. We'll all look her up after we stop listening to this podcast. Brandon, it's been fantastic to have you on the show. If folks want to reach out to you, maybe they're inspired to work for Adara, maybe they just want to talk to you, what's the best way to reach you? What's your preferred method of communication?
Yeah, LinkedIn's fine, or my email address, Brandon, BRANDON .Meyers, MEYERS @Adara, ADARA.com.
Awesome. Brandon, thanks so much for being on the show, and we'll talk to you on Friday for Friday Fundamentals.
Thanks, Sam. Really appreciate it. This was awesome.
Hello, listeners. It's Sam Jacobs. This is Sam's Corner. I really like that conversation with Brandon Meyers. And why did I like it? Because this is a man that started off in Michigan with the odds stacked against him and helped restructure, rebuild, and reorganize this company, Adara, so that they grew 35% in 2017, 45% in 2018, and broke $100 million in top-line sales, and even recreated the product and converted to SaaS in 2019, and are navigating this COVID world in a really impressive way. And Brandon's attitude, his perspective, his optimism, his leadership, they impress me. He's an impressive person. And I really think that his attitude and his growth mindset is something that we can all learn from, because you've got to overcome this fear of failure, right? You've got to overcome this fear of being bad, and you've got to be willing to sacrifice and willing to fail in order to achieve greatness. And so he inspires me. The other thing I will point out to you, be selective over what responsibilities you take on, because it's easy to wear a lot of hats, but you've got to optimize for your career and your role versus just the title, right? You've got to optimize for where can you make the biggest impact. And we talked about it on the show, but I've negotiated to run marketing. If you're not going to be a top 5%, a top 10% marketer, but you just want to be in charge, you just want to boss people around, tell them what to do, but you're not going to be great, focus on where you can be great. Many successful people have given up certain responsibilities where they couldn't be great in order to focus on the few responsibilities where they can have maximum impact and make themselves irreplaceable and indispensable. So think about that before you ask for that next expansion of your responsibility. I want to manage EMEA. I want to manage the SDRs. I want to manage the global team. Okay, are you ready to do that? Because it's better to be in your specific area and be excellent and be amazing than just grab responsibility like a tyrant, like somebody that wants to grab things. Anyway, I was going to make a comparison, but it wasn't going to be appropriate, so I'm not going to make it. Here's the point. We have 2 sponsors to thank for this amazing show that we just had. One of them is Sapper Consulting, and Sapper has just done truly amazing work with the creation of this Reggie platform. So Reggie, again, revenue teams use Reggie to easily and effortlessly optimize on the promise of sales engagement campaigns. So that's the point. So these folks all of our advertisers need to learn to give me copy that is in English. That last part was in English. Here's the point. Reggie takes the sequences that you're running through outreach. They take this information, these campaigns that you're running to get people to respond to you and to create meetings, and they help you optimize them because they have the data. They have millions upon millions of rows of data, and they can tell you what stuff works and what stuff doesn't work, and they can help you optimize these engagement campaigns so that you can make more money and book more meetings, and probably in a reverse order. So that's why Sapper Consulting and Reggie are awesome. Our other sponsor is a company called Outreach. They are the #1 sales engagement platform. Check them out at www.outreach.io. If you would like to reach me, send me an email, sam@revenuecollective.com. If you would like to learn more about Revenue Collective, go to revenuecollective.com. Revenue Collective is the platform that helps you unlock the potential in your career. That's what we do. If you're interested in learning more, we're growing by leaps and bounds. That was recently a clue in the New York Times crossword, leaps and bounds. But go to revenuecollective.com for more information. Thank you, Sapper Consulting. Thank you, Outreach. You're two great companies. We'll talk to you next time.